A long time ago, in a small, quiet suburb of America, there lived a man named Tom. Outwardly, he seemed to be an ordinary and friendly neighbor, but behind his good-natured smile there was an evil and sick nature. Since childhood, Tom has enjoyed the cruelty and torment he inflicted on animals and other children. Over the years, his need for violent actions began to grow, and he began to secretly follow young women, feeding on the fear and suffering he inflicted on his victims. He devised elaborate kidnapping plans to remain unnoticed, and carried his victims into the darkness of the night, where a terrible nightmare awaited them. Tom possessed an underground bunker, which he carefully equipped for his torment. In this gloomy place, the victims were trapped and powerless before his insane thirst for revenge. He mocked them, inflicting irreparable pain and suffering. Local residents were concerned about the missing young women, but the police could not find any evidence to link Tom to these crimes. Tom remained a skilled manipulator and skillfully hid his tracks. Pursued by Tom, Jake tried to get out of the dark tunnels, but each time he found himself in a dead end. He could hear noises behind him, Tom's ominous giggling, and he felt fear seizing his soul. Life and death were literally hanging by a thread, and he understood that time was working against him. Soon Jake discovered terrifying walls hung with the bloody footprints of Tom's previous victims. There were scary symbols and dark messages painted on them, which made his heart sink into his throat. He knew that these places served as a place of terrible rituals that Tom arranged over his victims. Climbing the abandoned stairs, Jake found himself in a maze of narrow tunnels, lit only by the dim light of distant lamps. Each step became more difficult, and fear made his heart pound harder. The tunnels were slowly shrinking, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. But even in this horror, he did not give up. He overcame every obstacle, skillfully avoiding the traps left by Tom. He was determined to reach the end, uncover the truth about the serial killer and stop him. Suddenly, a huge door appeared in front of him with the symbols of exactly the creepy cult that Tom served. But Jake didn't stop. He opened the door and faced a nightmarish sight. Inside was a huge hall filled with scary artifacts and bloody footprints. Jake's heart was pounding when he saw Tom, dressed in a black robe, sitting on a throne made of the bones of his victims. Behind Tom stood dark figures devoted to this gloomy cult. They performed terrible rituals, summoning the spirits of darkness and death. Jake felt fear and terror take hold of him, but he suppressed them, focusing on his mission. He started recording everything he saw in order to provide it as evidence to the police and bring those responsible to justice. However, his luck didn't last long. Tom and his followers noticed his presence and loomed over him like dark demons ready to destroy him. Tom's gaze was full of madness, and he wasn't going to leave a witness. One of the cult followers raised a bloody knife over Jake, preparing to deliver a fatal blow. At that moment, all the determination and steadfastness of the young journalist broke out. He didn't let his fear get the better of him, and managed to dodge the blow at the last moment. Now they were in a terrible fight, and Jake knew that this was his last chance. He fought Tom's ferocity and madness, deflecting his attacks and striking back. Death was at arm's length, but he didn't give up. Jake and Tom continued their deadly fight in a dark hall filled with blood and gloomy symbols. Weapons pierced the air, the sounds of blows and groans echoed through the maze of tunnels. Tom represented the most evil, and Jake was the last hope for light in this darkness. But the battle was unequal. Tom's powers seemed endless. His intelligence and agility spurred his desire to destroy the young journalist. Jake was losing strength by the second, and his clothes were soaked in blood, leaving bloody footprints on the floor. He was surrounded by followers of the cult, and each of them was ready to sacrifice himself to fulfill the will of his mad leader. Death was so close that it seemed as if she had already stretched her cold fingers to each of them. But then something unexpected happened. Suddenly, the sound of a message on a mobile phone was heard in the hall. Everyone froze, and the eyes of the participants in the fight turned to Tom. His face contorted in surprise, and he left Jake for a moment to check his phone. There was only one word on the screen: revenge. His eyes widened in horror. No one knew what it meant, but the sound of the message broke his concentration. This gave Jake the opportunity to recover and gather his strength. He decided to take advantage of the moment and hit Tom with the last jerk. The blow was accurate, and Tom fell to his knees, blood trickling down his black robe. There was a mixture of rage and impotence in his eyes. Jake took off, knowing that this was his chance to survive. He kept running through the dark tunnels, but every step was harder because his injuries slowed him down. The darkness swallowed him up, but he didn't give up. Behind him there were terrible halls with bloody traces, and the unknown was waiting ahead. Blood covered his hands and face, and it seemed that he had become a part of this nightmarish reality. But suddenly there was a bright light ahead. Jake saw a way out of the maze, and it gave him the last of his strength. He ran as if his life depended on it. And, having overcome the last obstacles, he got out. The sunlight blinded him, and he fell to the ground, overcome by impotence. The police arrived at the scene and began to inspect the underground tunnels, but there was no one there. Traces of blood led to the exit, but there was no criminal. Jake was lying on the ground, and his heart was pounding harder than ever. He felt that every breath was getting harder, and blood was still flowing from his wounds. The sunlight seemed so bright and welcome to him, but his joy was overshadowed by the fact that Tom was still somewhere nearby. The police continued to investigate and searched every corner of the underground tunnels, but Tom was never found. The message on his phone remained a mystery, and one day, when Jake was alone in his apartment, his phone rang again. He saw a familiar message: "I'll be back for you."